welcome to In Conversation. Behind me you can see the North Block, which is the financial seat of power in India, and from here the Finance Ministry operates, and a lot of work that went into the big bang economic stimulus of 20 lakh crore rupees actually happened here. And the one man who played a key role as far as inputs in the making of the design of the stimulus is concerned is none other than the Chief Economic Advisor of India, Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian. Welcome, Dr. Subramanian, to DD India.
Very good evening, Munmun.
Good evening. So the financial package is out and that was long awaited. Will that be enough to tide over the economic troubles that we face?
Munmun, if we have to actually understand this aspect, I think it is important to keep in mind what is the impact of the COVID episode really on the economy. And if we think from first principles, it primarily impacts the demand side of the economy and can also have impact on the supply side. On the demand side, what it can do is, because people will not demand some of the less essential items, the discretionary items, demand of that will come down, and firms that may actually be catering to such demand may then face some supply side problems as well. Therefore, the key aspects of the stimulus package had to be on the demand side and on the supply side. I think both sides have been addressed. If you look at the package for the MSMEs, 3 lakh crores of credit, which is 100% guaranteed by the government, and that's been done so that these the banks can basically just on lend without taking on any risk, together with the subordinate debt that has been also provided to the MSMEs and the equity infusion through the fund of funds. These are all important aspects of the stimulus package on the supply side. If you look at the agriculture and the migrant workers, migrant laborers, as well as the changes on the labor side, I think these all together also will go a long way in affecting the productivity in the economy, and therefore are important steps as well.
You've been confident of a V-shaped recovery. Does this package make you all the more confident?
So as I've been maintaining that one of the aspects that we have to be concerned or be wary about is to not get excessively pessimistic, because all of us humans tend to be subject to what is called the saliency bias, which is we tend to overweight recent events and not give as much weightage to some of the events in the past. For instance, if we are in normal times, we discount the possibility of a black swan event like the COVID pandemic. But when we are in a pandemic or in a black swan event, we then don't factor in the possibility of normal times again. And that's why there may be actually excessive pessimism. If we go by the research on the Spanish flu episode, which was a far worse pandemic than the COVID-19, because the rate of infection was almost 30 times as much. The mortality rates was about 3 times as much. And yet there was a V-shaped recovery with the Spanish flu. So at this point in time, therefore, I do think that this, even though it may seem less likely at this point in time, it is likely to also lead to a V-shaped recovery, and the demand and supply side measures together with the productivity that has been worked on now through the stimulus package will have a beneficial impact on aiding that recovery.
And when can we expect that economic turnaround or rebound to happen?
See, that is a far more difficult question to answer. It's in any time, talking about the future involves crystal ball gazing, and especially in times like now, with far more uncertainty, it's even more difficult to predict exactly when this will happen. It critically depends on when will we possibly have, for instance, vaccine, which may then reduce the effect of the pandemic, because a lot of the economic steps that we are taking, or the steps in terms of the lockdown, is because of the pandemic. So it really depends on the pandemic itself. From what I read, and some of the epidemiologists are saying that we should have a vaccine, let's say by September. There are some people who are saying that. There are other people who are saying that it will take a year to have the vaccine. My sense is that once the pandemic is basically over, then the economy will be back to normal.
Okay, once the pandemic is over, the economy would be back to normal. You're saying that epidemiologists are saying that by September we can expect a vaccine. But any estimate that the government would have worked on for the Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 GDP numbers and for this entire fiscal? Because we are seeing a lot of projections happen by IMF, World Bank and international credit rating agencies.
Yes, and I just wanted to clarify, what I meant by is that there may still be some sectors which will basically have some amount of lockdown, and so it will not be back completely to normal till the pandemic is there. Again, with all the caveats about the uncertainty, it's possible that I think Q1 will actually be bad. That's expected. Q2 may be actually better than Q1, but I do expect some of the recovery to start in the second half of the year. And therefore, it's possible that there may be actually, a baseline at this point in time, we have estimated around between 1.5% to 2%, but it could actually be, also a decline in output. That is also.
That's for the entire fiscal?
That's for the entire fiscal. There may be a chance of actually this year, for us basically dealing with a situation of a decline in output, but that's possible as well. But baseline, I think actually between 1.5% to 2% is what I estimate based on the research of the Spanish flu and not factoring in some of the saliency bias that I mentioned earlier.
The MSME sector has been the worst hit in a sense. It's at least been badly hit, one can surely say that, by the lockdown. Do we expect any turnaround considering the measures that have been announced for liquidity, for job creation, for their viability as a whole?
Yes, the MSME sector, as you would know, Munmun, is a significant creator of jobs, and the steps that have been taken for the MSME sector are quite comprehensive, and I say that in terms of two dimensions. One, both the MSMEs that are actually healthy and MSMEs that are stressed or NPAs, there have been steps that have been taken for those. At the same time, if you look in terms of the capital structure of firms that you have, which is you have debt, subordinate debt and equity, all three parts have been addressed as well, and I was referring to this earlier. So by being comprehensive in terms of both the coverage, and I think it's important to keep in mind, if you look at the tax data, about 98% of the MSMEs have turnover less than 75 crores. So and the new definition which has also been brought in because of the perverse incentive that it created for MSMEs to remain small, that has been expanded. Thereby now MSMEs can have turnover less than 100 crores and they can still be defined as MSMEs. So about 98% of the MSMEs are covered, and I think that's a very important part. And every firm that already has a loan with a bank, every MSME can actually get 20% greater. So this will add to their to their working capital situation, give them cash, and thereby also enable them to tackle the current difficulties. Just to give you a sense, a typical firm in India turns over its inventory about 4 to 5 times a year. So using that, if you then assess a 20% increase to in working capital can definitely help them tide over for a quarter at least. And so this is
and the jobs will be back as well, hopefully.
The jobs, actually what this does is to ensure that job losses are minimized, because if you think about it, the intent primarily at this point in time is to actually minimize the damage, because if you look at even internationally, in the United States, the numbers that have been filed for unemployment insurance are at a historical high, and even greater than those in the Great Depression. So this is something which every country is facing, and the effort therefore has to be to minimize the damage as much as possible, which this this package will help in that.
Well, NBFCs that also lend to MSMEs have been facing difficult times even in the pre-COVID times. So will these measures that have been announced, like credit guarantee, liquidity support, help them navigate this?
Yes, I think I'm glad you actually asked that, because this, by including the set of measures for NBFCs, especially what is called the buyer of last resort, which is that the bonds of the NBFCs will be bought, and there's also a guarantee scheme that is being provided. Together, those MSMEs that borrow from NBFCs also get covered. So you actually, through the 3 lakh crore facility of extending the credit, MSMEs that borrow from banks have been covered, and then by giving these facilities, these benefits to the NBFCs, those that borrow from the NBFCs have also been actually covered.
For migrant laborers, free ration has been announced for some time, and also a major scheme, One Nation, One Ration card will also be rolled out in some time. Will that transform the PDS system dramatically and provide the much needed succor to migrant laborers irrespective of where they are?
I think, in order to understand the difficulties that are faced by migrant laborers, it is key to recognize that their inability to access the PDS system provided an important source of vulnerability, because under the NFSA, they're entitled to about 35 kilograms of cereal, but because they have they can only use their ration card in their state of residence, or where they actually were born, not where they actually are working, that created a key source of vulnerability. By providing them free rations for the next 2 months, and also accelerating the process of the One Nation, One Ration card, I think a key source of vulnerability that the migrant laborers faced has been, there's an effort that has been made to address that. Also, some of the reforms that are being worked on, especially on the labor side, etc., will create more jobs. Now we have to understand that the migrant labor actually forms an important component of the informal sector in this country, and about 90% of the workforce is in the informal sector, to be precise 89%. Now, by enabling greater jobs in the formal sector through some of these reforms, informal sector actually now, these laborers get the opportunity to become formal sector workers, and that is the best way of generating economic and social inclusion, which is a job in the formal sector, which will benefit all these informal sector workers, and thereby also have spillover benefits for the migrant laborers as well.
Well, concessional credit is being provided to industry. Industry is saying that there aren't too many workers, because most of them are migrant workers and they've gone back to their respective native places. How is this problem being addressed?
So, as we were discussing earlier, the migrant labor, one of their key sources of vulnerability was the fact that they were unable to access the PDS system, and they therefore were exposed to difficulties on some of their essential like food items. Now, by alleviating that particular concern, one of the key pain points for migrant labor is getting addressed. Together with that, some of the steps that are being taken to on minimum wages, for instance. Yesterday the Honorable Finance Minister spoke about a national minimum wage and increasing the coverage of the minimum wage itself, which will have an impact of increasing the wage that these laborers migrant workers can obtain, and therefore it becomes more attractive for them to come back, both in terms of their basic needs being taken care of, also for the reward that they get for the work that they would do in their place of work.
For the agriculture and allied sector, a number of announcements have been made as well. How will these announcements fast track the move or progress towards doubling farmers' income by 2022 and also create a world-class agri-infrastructure? Will states need to be taken on board for various reforms, for instance the APMC reforms, even though the Finance Minister spoke about how the Parliament would legislate on a law?
So Munmun, it's very important to understand the reasons why the income of especially the small and marginal farmers has not increased as much. Part of the reason is because they don't have enough opportunities to be able to go and sell their produce where they want. The APMC, for instance, in the current scenario actually imposes restrictions on that. Also, because oftentimes the farmer does not get enough credit from the formal sector, that keeps him or her beholden to the to the intermediary in the APMC, someone whom basically we call the Adatya, for instance. Now, because that intermediary is the one that provides the credit when the farmer needs it. By combining the Kisan credit card, and the enormous increase that has been planned in that, by providing them formal sector credit in that process, and through the APMC reforms enabling the farmer to go and sell in other places, I think the options for the farmer, especially the small and marginal one, just gets expanded significantly. And what that does is, because if the farmer has the opportunity to say that I need not sell to you, I can go and sell in a mandi which is basically maybe 5-10 kilometers down, just the fact that he has that option will enable him to get a better price, because increases his bargaining power. And so the credit part, together with the opening up of these of the market, also the facilitation of electronic markets. So these are the APMC and the electronic markets give the farmer greater opportunities in terms of where he or she can sell. And the credit basically then enables him to sort of not necessarily be so beholden to the or be held hostage by the intermediary. So these are very important reforms in terms of especially for the small and marginal farmers, where our regulations over the last 7 decades have sort of constrained their growth.
Will states need to come on board on this?
Yes, because agriculture is a state subject, and so there will be, I'm sure there will be consultations between the center and the states on these, and now I reckon that the states are also seeing the benefits that they can provide the small and marginal farmers through these reforms, and therefore they do see the value in being able to implement these reforms as well.
But when can we expect a turnaround in the housing and real estate sector? Because over 2 days at least a number of announcements were made for these two sectors, and we expect that demand will go up as a result of that, and there will be a lot of jobs created, for instance in the construction sector.
So some of the measures that have been announced for the NBFCs, those are also intended for the for the HFCs, the housing finance companies, and also the microfinance institutions. So the housing finance companies, because they end up giving loans to real estate companies, I think that's a very important step, because for them their ability to borrow money actually was really affected. Together with that, some of the measures that have been taken on force majeure, which is the fact that contractual obligations can be can basically be postponed by 6 months, and those are important especially in real estate, because in real estate there's a lot of contractual work that happens, and thereby some of the distress in that sector can also be addressed. So overall, I think these set of steps that have been taken will help the real estate sector as well.
So besides borrowings, how will the government be financing the financial stimulus?
So as of now, if you look at the increase in the borrowing that has been budgeted, and I was looking at the yields, the way they moved. So in the weekend, the increase in the borrowing requirement was announced, and the
by 50%.
Yes, by 50%, and the yield moved only from the 5.9% at which it closed on Friday, the 10-year government bond yield, and when it opened on Monday morning, it actually was 6.1%. So only a 20 basis point increase. What that conveys is that the market thinks there is enough scope to be able to complete this this 50% additional borrowing without having to without the yield having to increase significantly. That's basically the signal that came. Part of the reason also is because the steps that were taken in the budget on including the Government of India bonds in the sovereign bond index. Now that is a very important step, because if you, I'm just going to sort of give you some back of the envelope calculations for what that means in terms of the amount of money that can come in from a new clientele. About $4 trillion of money tracks these bond indices. So, by the way, this is rupee denominated bonds. And of the $4 trillion, India is expected to get a weight of about 1.5 to 3%, because it's an index, and so there is a weight in that each country has. So if you take even the lower number in that range, 1.5%, that translates into $60 billion, which is about our gross borrowing for a year. What I'm saying then is that there is therefore a 100% increase or a doubling of the amount of the money that can come in from a new clientele, because these are basically foreign portfolio investors that passively invest through this bond index. So the bottom line of what I'm trying to say here is that even with market borrowing, some of the steps that we've taken, we should be able to actually finance the requirements. Now, as and when we basically need to, let's say resort to some of the other measures, those will also be considered.
And are you considering some of the measures like maybe printing currency?
That is also one of the options that is in consideration. As I've always maintained, there are both costs and benefits to any policy, whether it's actually market borrowing or even the monetization. I think monetization, as an exception in a year like this, is something that can certainly be considered. But we've anyway created the infrastructure in terms of the governance infrastructure to ensure that is not a common occurrence. But in an exceptional year, I think exceptional measures are those that can be considered, and so I wouldn't rule that out.
Since fiscal deficits are likely to rise, will the centre and the states need to rework their fiscal consolidation plans?
So I think what is important to keep in mind here is that there will be a one time this year, there will be a change in the fiscal deficits of the centre and the states, but we do expect us to come back to adhering to the FRBM guidelines from the next year. And
any target set for this year?
It will depend on how the revenues pan out. And the revenues themselves then depend on what the growth rate of the economy will be. So all I'm saying is that there are many interlinked elements here, and each of those is quite uncertain as well. So I would say there will be some deterioration in the fiscal deficit, and I think the extra borrowing, actually from that you can impute the numbers, but we'll have to continue to recalibrate and keep assessing the situation. I am a little wary of giving any particular numbers, even with the growth rate. For instance, I have actually maintained that there is a significant range for it to vary, because there is huge uncertainty, as we economists call, which is unknown unknowns.
Absolutely. Now, in the economic survey that you'd written in July 2019, you'd mentioned the nudge theory there to resolve a lot of social and economic issues. We've seen that play out in the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. We've seen so much of that even in the corona times. Yes. So has that nudge theory got an extra nudge during these testing times?
I like the way you put it, nudge to the nudge. So one of the things that actually we had emphasized a lot, when we talked about nudge and behavioral economics, is utilizing some of the social and cultural norms that we Indians as a very old culture have just inherited. So in the context of, for instance, gender equality, we talked about beti aapki dhan lakshmi or grih lakshmi. So like that, if you think about it, when I was a kid, if I went out somewhere, actually even to play, when I came back, my mom and dad would insist on me washing my hands, feet, face, and now these are very healthy things, which is just hygienic. But at some point in time, we actually started thinking about these as superstition, but they were well founded, based on on science. And what the coronavirus episode has now illustrated is that we need to be going back to some of these basic measures, and that's where I think the fact that these have already existed in our culture, in our social and cultural norms, I think the nudge becomes easier, and that's something which we certainly should be using. Together with that, I think it's also what the lockdown across the world, as a result of the pandemic, has also illustrated is the impact on the climate, and that's something again India has been at the front runner, and so that there also I think the role for nudge and bringing that awareness about climate change, I think, would be very crucial.
You've written about Thalinomics in your economic survey of January 2020 itself, and you said that the Thali has become more affordable today than it was, say, in 2006-2007. Will the Thali continue to be affordable in these times?
I would think so, but I will say, as with all the other things, we still need to continue watching. But the reason I think it will be is because a large proportion of the cereals, which actually occupy almost 50% of the price of the Thali, those are now being given free by the government. As part of the first COVID stimulus package, the government had basically given 5 kilograms of cereals per person, and 1 kilogram of pulses as well to get per family. So that covers your two key components in the Thali, which is your cereals and your pulses. The LPG is also being given, free cylinders are being given. So some of the critical components that go into making the Thali, some of those are being given for free, especially to some of the vulnerable households. That may get partly offset by increases in prices of some of the other items, which is for instance maybe vegetables, or there may be some increases there because some of the supply chains have gotten disrupted. So in the short run, I think I would say that in the next few months, I don't expect a significant increase in the price of the Thali, but maybe there won't be a significant decrease either. So it sort of remain range bound.
And how has life been in lockdown? Have you been able to read more, maybe watch more films, or is that just not possible?
One of the key changes that happened for me was that I've been home alone. My family lives in Hyderabad, and so before the lockdown I used to end up going once in maybe 3 weeks or so in the weekend, but of late in the last 3 months I have not been able to. A side benefit of that has been, therefore, I've had ample time to read a lot about especially on the the epidemiological aspects of the COVID, and also go and read, for instance, about other pandemics, the Spanish flu episode, and some of the kind of episodes like these that have happened, which is if you take the Great Depression or the Second World War. The Great Depression was followed by the New Deal, which President Roosevelt brought in. The Second World War was followed by the Marshall Plan, and then if you take the global financial crisis as well, each of these episodes have typically been followed by some important changes. Even if you go and look at our own, the 1991 crisis, right? I think leaders that history remembers are people that grab these opportunities. If you look at our 1991, the Prime Minister then, P.V. Narasimha Rao, was the one who actually turned that crisis into an opportunity, and that is, I think, what sort of leadership stands for. I do think that in this case as well, the Honourable Prime Minister is really looking at turning this crisis into an opportunity as well. While we are going through this, the next few months will definitely be difficult, but if you're able to implement some of the long standing reform measures that sort of halt or stop the expansion of productivity in the economy, I think we can really emerge out of this in a very, very positive way.
In fact, Dr. Subramanian, these insights are so important in the making of the financial stimulus and will help us even further. Thank you for having joined us.
My pleasure, Munmur.